Okay, we've at last reached chapter 8, which was the one I've been looking forward to. A day's fishing in Chile. I think this is quite fun, this one. Having told you something about the weather you may expect and the tackle you should bring along with you, the time has come to introduce you to what I should describe as a typical day's fishing in Chile. You are comfortably installed at a fishing hotel somewhere in the south of Chile. And although you have been fishing ever since you were a boy at school and had experience in many parts of the world, including New Zealand and British Columbia, you are pleasurably excited over the prospect of a new experience in unknown waters. The weather seems fairly settled, and the people you have met on the train and elsewhere have been very friendly and have made you feel at home, despite the fact that you do not know more than a few words of their language. Yes, undoubtedly, Chile is a hospitable country, and the stranger can be assured that he will meet with every kindness when he comes along. You have enjoyed a good lunch and have buttonholed the owner of the hotel in an effort to complete your fishing arrangements without delay. You are obviously having a bit of a struggle over language difficulties and are considerably relieved when an Englishman at another table comes across and volunteers his assistance. He tells you that his friend and he are going upriver next day for a full day and invites you to join them. You accept with alacrity, whereupon he suggests that you leave all the arrangements in his hands. Needless to say, you are only too happy to do so and feel that your first hurdle is over. It transpires in the course of conversation that his friend is a Chilean who has traveled a lot and seems to know London as well as you do, and that he is an Englishman who came out at the end of the war in 1918 and made Chile his home. You discover that you have a great deal in common with your newfound friends, and altogether you are highly satisfied with the partnership you have made. Later in the day, you endeavor to find out something about the arrangements for the next day, but all you can gather is that everything has been settled. The boats have already been dispatched on ox carts, and that all you have to do is be ready for breakfast at 8 o'clock next morning. Having left instructions with the hotel porter, who is also the waiter, bartender, and general factotum about the premises, that you wish to be wakened at 7 o'clock, you proceed to prepare a few casts and generally get your tackle in order, after which you tumble into bed in an atmosphere of glorious and eager expectancy. Next morning, you are roused at 20 minutes past 7. It is the custom of the hotel porters in the south to get you up either much too early or too late, but very rarely at the right time. And instead of having plenty of time to get ready, you have a bit of a scramble in order to be downstairs for breakfast at the appointed hour. But you needn't really have hurried at all, as there is no sign of your friends, nor of breakfast, and you have to hang around for 15 minutes before anything happens. You are accustomed to a good old-fashioned English breakfast, which is not easy to obtain in a country where a cup of coffee and a roll is generally considered adequate. But you make the best of it on scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, and by 20 to 9, your party is ready for the road. But where is that confounded taxi? Your friends exclaim. It was ordered for 8:30. A small boy hanging round at the door of the hotel, there is always at least one small boy there at any hour of the day, is sent off to dig out the chauffeur, who is apparently a genial fellow who answers to the nickname of Guaton, Fatty, and a well-known character in the village. In an incredibly short time, the peaceful atmosphere of this little place is rudely disturbed by a truly horrible row coming from a small shack on the other side of the plaza, village square. And eventually, spluttering and gasping, your car of a rare old vintage makes its appearance and advances by short rushes to the door of the hotel. Guaton, still busy with his breakfast roll, and of course unshaven, is quite unconcerned, and a reference to the fact that he is late only produces a broad grin from him, and the shattering explanation, "Me quedé dormido, patron." I overslept, master. There was a finality about this laconic answer which indicated clearly that the discussion was closed. It should be explained at this juncture that in small places, nobody appears to have a watch or to care about the time. and the universal timepiece is the clock at the railway station. For an Englishman who has been brought up with a strict regard for punctuality, such utter disregard for time is apt to be rather upsetting and indeed nerve-wracking. If the best is to be got out of a holiday in Chile, however, a philosophical attitude should be accepted from the very beginning. To return to our story, you wonder how you will all fit in the car, as, in addition to your friends and yourself, there are 3 boatmen and a good-sized lunch basket. But the car is one of the old roomy touring type, with tip-up seats, and no great difficulty is experienced. So finally, everything is ready and you are off. The old engine shows considerable reluctance in the initial stages, but gradually works itself up to a fever heat. And all is well outside of the fact that you are being jostled about rather badly. Fortunately, there are 3 of you in the back seat, and you are wedged in tightly, and this alone prevents you from hitting the roof. How the car is able to surmount the series of obstacles is amazing. And you are filled with genuine admiration for the veteran and his phlegmatic driver, Guaton. You really had no idea that a road anywhere could be as bad as this one, nor would you have believed that a car would go over it. However, you are making progress quite steadily and all seems to be going well when the engine suddenly stops, having apparently had quite enough of it. Well, you feel that this just had to happen and you are not in the least surprised. Guaton gets out, opens the bonnet, has a cursory glance at the engine, takes out a piece of wire from his pocket, works intently for a few minutes while you all sit still behind with bated breath, and the damage is repaired. He also notices that the front bumper has fallen on the ground on one side, and he ties it up securely with a bit of stout string. Excuse me, this is just funny. It is surprising what a Chilean chauffeur can do with wire and string. And you now lose any doubts you may have had as to his ability to take you to your destination. Off you go again, and you eventually reach what you think is your destination, but no such luck. It is merely a ferry which you have to cross. It is one of the old type of ferries, of which there are many in Chile, consisting of a cable stretched across the river with a pulley, from which a strong chain is attached to the ferry boat, which is propelled across the river by the force of the current. Of course, when you arrive at the river, the ferry boat is at the far side, and there is not a living soul to be seen over there, nor the remotest sign of any human habitation. Guaton and the 3 boatmen shout and whistle fiercely, but 10 minutes have gone and there is still no sign of life on the other side. You feel that this is really too bad, and you are rapidly becoming exasperated. Your friends, having shown their annoyance at the outset by loud outbursts of fluent Spanish, which have made you green with envy, have ceased to worry and are sitting on a log quietly enjoying a cigarette. You stand there, gazing at the river, certain that you are missing the morning rise and bewailing your fate that you should have been induced to come to a country where everything is so incredibly haphazard. Punctuated by shouts and whistles, half an hour has gone when a small urchin makes his appearance on the far side. He takes in the situation at a glance and disappears again, to reappear a little later with 2 Indian lads who lazily commence to move the ferry boat across the river. It transpires that the old Indian who looks after the ferry for the government was annoyed over the insignificance of the tip received from a party which crossed at a late hour on the previous day, and somebody has had to suffer. Taking a car across on one of those ferries is no easy task, but the judicious placing of big stones and planks of wood solves the problem, and the car skids and bumps its way on and off the ferry without apparently turning a hair, while you look on in undisguised amazement. Eventually, you reach the other side, and off you go again on the final stage of your journey. The climax in the morning's misfortune comes when a little further on, you pass 3 ox carts loaded with boats, wending their way slowly as if time were of no possible account. By the time you reach your final destination on the river higher up, you are speechless with indignation. And maybe it is just as well that you do not speak the language, as your relations with your boatman would undoubtedly be strained to breaking point. Your friends seem to be unperturbed and remark that by the time the rods are put up, the boats will probably have arrived. Your boatman gives you a hand and assists you in the selection of the fly, after which you leave him to fix up your trolling rod while you have a few casts in the river. Although you are unaware of it, this is an important moment of the day when your boatman is sizing you up and making up his mind as to whether you are a fisherman or not. On his verdict, a great deal may depend. You discover subsequently that he has been chosen specially for you on the assumption that you are a good fisherman and that he is one of the best boatmen on the river. If he is satisfied that you know what you are doing, there is no trouble he will not go to in order to ensure the success of the day. The good boatman in the south is a most willing fellow with plenty of common sense, and the fact that you cannot talk to each other does not prevent you from developing a highly satisfactory mutual understanding. The other two boats have gone, and your boat is now ready, more or less 1 hour later than intended, and you are still worried in case you may have missed the best of the morning. Half an hour passes, an hour, and you have not seen the semblance of a rise. Your boatman, silent behind you, is managing the boat well, and you are missing no likely water. He is now maneuvering the boat to the bank, and immediately below you see a run with a still pool at the foot of it, which looks promising. You get out and cast across and down the run, allowing your fly to drift into the pool below. After a few casts, you suddenly feel a determined tug. You strike. The reel sings, and a beautiful rainbow trout leaps out of the water. For the next few minutes, you are kept busy, and finally, your first Chilean trout, a 5-pounder, is safely in the net. The boatman grins, and you feel better. It is now noon, and for the next hour, you have excellent sport without a dull moment. By the time you arrive at the spot down below on the riverbank where your friends have decided to lunch, you have picked up 3 more fish, one about 2 pounds and the other two around 3 to 4 pounds, all good fighting rainbows. You have forgotten all about the morning's annoyances, you are enthusiastic about the river, and you are ready for a good lunch. The other two have not done quite so well as you have, but appear to be profoundly satisfied, and are both in the best of good humor, apparently deriving great satisfaction out of your good fortune. They are proud of the fishing in Chile and anxious that you should have an equally high opinion of it. Your Chilean friend is superintending the lunch arrangements, and as he hands you a martini cocktail, he explains to you how the trout is being cooked. Wood has been gathered by the boatmen, and a large fire has been built. The fish is cleaned, salted, and peppered liberally, and placed inside greaseproof paper, which has been well buttered. This package is then rolled inside a newspaper, and the final package, secured with string, is thoroughly soaked in the river, after which it is buried in the red-hot embers for 20 minutes. When the burnt paper is removed, the skin of the fish peels off very easily, and the flesh is beautifully cooked. Possibly the pleasantness of the surroundings and the joy of lunching in the open air contribute in your appreciation of the fish cooked in this manner, but whatever the explanation is, you quite honestly admit that you have seldom tasted more delicious fish. A bottle of the best Chilean red wine is produced, and you have a really good lunch, at the end of which a short siesta is indicated before you resume fishing. It is a lovely day and quite hot after lunch. The fishing is spasmodic, and nothing of any great interest happens until about 5 o'clock. From then until the sun goes down over the hilltops, you have a glorious time, finishing up with a 7-pounder just as it is getting dark. You have hardly had time to notice the sunset, which was brilliant, but that does not matter a great deal, as you will see many more sunsets before you leave Chile. As you are packing up and examining the catch, you reflect on the day's sport. That glorious final hour when the sun was going down, when you were dry flying and every moment held you spellbound with intense excitement, when the only sounds on the river were the gentle swish of your rod and line, the flopping of the rising trout, and the note of an occasional bird, how quickly it seemed to pass. You were completely lost to the outside world. Your troubles for the time being had ceased to exist. Nothing mattered but the absorbing occupation in which you were engaged. There was no jarring note to mar your enjoyment, nothing to disturb your peace. And when you analyzed the day, you realized that 2 brief spells of unbounded pleasure were responsible for the entire day's enjoyment, and more than compensated for such petty annoyances or dull moments as you may have had. Was it not so often the case that a whole day's pleasure hinged on one outstanding incident of the day? So often, an uneventful round of golf has given you pleasure in the recollection of one inspired shot. Well, Anyhow, you will never forget your first day's fishing in Chile, and you look forward eagerly to further enjoyment of these unspoiled waters. You trudge back to the hotel, a tired but happy man, and there, over a whiskey and soda, you compare notes with your friends. You have all had a splendid day, and when you express your gratitude to them for having taken you, a complete stranger, under their wing, the answer is that you are welcome to join them whenever you wish. And when you are dropping off to sleep, pleasantly tired after the day in the open air, you reflect what a difference it makes to life when people are really friendly, and you feel that there is nothing shallow or insecure about the kindness you have received in this far-off land. That hopeless feeling that you are a stranger in a strange land has gone, and you are ready to enjoy every minute of your stay. Maybe I have been guilty of exaggeration in my picture of a typical day's fishing in Chile. If so, the intention has been well meant, contriving to show that the real pleasures of your stay in Chile will completely counterbalance such difficulties as you may encounter, to which you possibly attach too much importance. Nothing has been farther from my mind than to convey any depreciatory idea of the simple country folk of this hospitable land. You will find that, while they may put no value on time and annoy you by taking things just as they come, they possess the inherent qualities of friendship and helpfulness so valuable in human relationships. For my own part, I have received nothing but kindness at their hands. What a nice chapter that is. He clearly loved Chile a lot, and was doing his very best to promote it as a fishing destination. Okay, well, let's continue with chapter 9, the Trout Rivers of Chile, a Geographical Survey. In the chapter on climatic and general conditions, I divided the fishing map of Chile into 3 zones and told you something about the conditions in each zone. Now I propose to go into further detail regarding the trout rivers, and in order to avoid wearying my readers with a long list of names which mean nothing to them, I shall endeavor to confine my attention to the better known among the rivers and shall make the survey as concise as possible. Proceeding from north to south, we start with the central zone with its mountain streams and small trout, where the small trout fry is all that is required. Central zone. I believe that the Aconcagua Valley, in which I include the river Putaendo as a tributary of the river Aconcagua, is the most northerly part of Chile where trout are to be found, and this is a reasonable assumption, as further north, I should imagine that conditions would be quite unsuitable for trout owing to the heat. My central zone extends from the river Aconcagua in the north to the river Claro in the vicinity of Talca, and in this zone, as already mentioned, the main rivers, Aconcagua, Maipo, etc., are dirty all year round, and trout fishing is confined to smaller rivers and streams. In the old days, the Aconcagua Valley was a favorite rendezvous of fishermen, particularly from Valparaiso, but is not much frequented nowadays. As there are few clear streams in the valley and so many nearer to Santiago, fishermen from the capital rarely go there. The best known streams in the valley are the Blanco, Los Leones, Riesillos, and Las Perdices. Within easy reach of Santiago, there are 2 valleys, the Las Condes Valley, through which runs the river Mapocho, a tributary of the river Maipo, and the Volcan Valley, through which flows the river Maipo itself. There is no fishing in the river Mapocho, as the water is fouled by copper tailings from the Disputada mines, but in the vicinity of the winter sports fields at Farellones, there is a stream, the Molina, where trout are to be found. This stream is probably the coldest of all the central zone streams and highly suitable for trout, but unfortunately it is not often clear. However, the Covarrubias, a tributary of the Molina, is almost invariably clear and has some delightful pools. Still nearer Santiago, there is the Arrayan, about which little is known nowadays, as there is no right of way through the property through which it runs. Rumor has it that there are brook trout in this stream, and there may well be, as it was stocked with brook trout fry a long time ago. In the Volcan Valley, there is a bigger choice of streams, the best of which are the Colanco, about which you will hear more later, the Manzano, and the Clarillo. Before leaving this section, I must mention an incident which took place in the river Molina some time ago. A party of fishermen, including Mr. Glebov, a Russian music master and a man of extraordinary adaptability, and all efforts to catch the trout on the usual standard flies proved unavailing. Late in the day, Mr. Glebov plucked a strand of red wool from his wife's sweater, tied it round a hook, cast it into a pool, and took out a 5-pounder, which must be about the record for that stream. On another occasion in Farellones, 7,000 feet up, it was discovered at cocktail time that there was no ice in the log cabin. Mr. Glebov immediately grabbed a bucket and climbed up to the nearest patch of snow, returning in an incredibly short time with the bucket filled with beautiful crisp snow. In the Coya and Coquenes district to the east of Rancagua, there are several good trout streams, one of which, the Coquenes, runs through a farm, the property of the Braden Copper Company. This was, I found out, founded in 1904, an American company which controlled the El Teniente copper mine in Chile until 1967, when its copper holdings were nationalized. Other well-known streams in this valley are the Claro and Pangal. At Rengo, there is the River Claro, where good sport can generally be had throughout the fishing season. And further south, in the neighborhood of San Fernando, is another well-known river, the Tinguiririca, which flows through a number of farms in its lengthy course. Unfortunately, the Tinguiririca is often dirty and unfishable, but there is another Claro in this neighborhood, which is good upstream from Puente Negro. The Clarillo is also good, but the fish in this district are generally small, and there are too many of them. Between San Fernando and Curicó, there are the rivers Chimbarongo and Teno, both of which contain trout, but are not much frequented. And further south in the vicinity of Talca, there is yet another river, Claro. Claro means clear and is a favorite name for Chilean rivers. And so for that matter is Colorado, which means the reverse, dirty. A few years ago, this Claro near Talca was a fine river with plenty of brown trout averaging around 2 pounds in splendid conditions. What has happened to it, I cannot say, but the latest report I've heard is that it is hardly worth fishing now, a state of affairs which calls for investigation. In recent years, the Upper Maule near Talca and Lake Maule have come into great prominence, and there are many reports of incredibly large rainbow trout having been caught in that remote and barren region in the Chilean uplands. When the early reports were received of big fish in Lake Maule, a party was organized by a sportsman in the American embassy and flown up there. The lake stands at an altitude of about 10,000 feet in a Catalina flying boat. And I've included a footnote of one of those. There we are, Catalina flying boat. The obvious way to get there, if you are lucky enough to be able to arrange to go that way, as it takes 1 hour as compared with a heavy journey by car, the latter part of which is over dusty mountainous roads. This expedition was a conspicuous success, and many good-sized rainbows were caught, with several over 10 pounds, with the result that enthusiasm for Lake Maule ran high, and it has been greatly frequented. Unfortunately, its fame has contributed to its undoing, and a fishing friend informs me that on a recent visit on a public holiday, the place was a miniature Coney Island, with fishermen of all types crowded around the lake and river, some trying to fish, but most of them asleep. There is no accommodation at the lake, and if you decide to camp up there, take plenty of warm clothes, as it is cold. Local Talca fishermen, however, are proud of the Maule, and it has earned a reputation for big fish. If you have the good fortune to be there when few fishermen are about, you will probably enjoy good sport. Intermediate zone. My intermediate zone extends from Talca in the north to Lautaro in the south, and has an abundance of trout rivers. As we proceed south, the trout are getting gradually bigger, and we are in the transition stage from the sea trout size of fly to the salmon fly. The fishing in this zone is comparatively little known, except to local fishermen, as it is mostly off the beaten track, and there is a lack of accommodation for the visitor. The first river of note is the Achibueno, south of Linares, and apparently the ground feeding in this river is much better than further north, as the flesh of the trout is pinker, and they begin to resemble the bigger fish in the south in condition. With any luck, you will get a 4 or 5 pounder in this river. Further south, before reaching Chilean, there are the rivers Longaví, Perquiloquen, and Nuble. The latter is a fine river, and I have very pleasant recollections of a weekend spent some years ago at the Dadinco farm, where fishermen were always made welcome by Don Luis Izquierdo Valdez and his charming wife. As an added attraction, they built a fishing and shooting lodge for their friends, which, as a contemporary of the film Snow White, was known as La Casa de los Siete Enanos, the House of the Seven Dwarfs. My chief recollection of the river Nuble is that I had no luck at all until I switched from salmon to sea trout flies, after which the sport was excellent. The best fish caught among our party was a 6-pounder brown trout. Another point which sticks in my memory is that we were each provided with a horse and groom and were able to cross the river where it would have been impossible by foot and take full advantage of the fishing on both banks. The best time to fish the lower Nuble is in January, as the water gets rather low towards the end of the season. In the upper reaches near the Cordillera, the fishing is also very good, as is borne out by the catch of a 9.5-pound brown trout by Ian Morrison in March 1941. He goes there every year in autumn and swears by it. South of Chilean, there are the rivers Diquilin and Cholguan, both of which are very pleasant for the fishermen, before you come to the rivers Laja and the Biobío. I recall with great pleasure a pleasant weekend spent in the Los Tilos farm in the vicinity of the Diquilin some years ago with a group of fishermen. The Laja is the main tributary of the Biobío and will be the subject of a separate chapter, as I have chosen it as the representative trout river of this zone. The Biobío is a big river and has a reputation for good-sized trout. Excellent sport is to be had in the upper reaches, as the following report will show. Anthony Stobart, that's Anthony Bridges Stobart, 1903 to 1989. He worked for a steelmaking company, John Summers and Sons, and spent time in Chile and Argentina, where he kept the Anglo-Argentine Iron Company running throughout the war. This is from his obituary in the Himalayan Journal, number 46, 1990. Anyway, Anthony Stobart, accompanied by a Buenos Aires friend, David Babington Smith, made a trip into the Manzanar and Lonquimay district of Curacotin in the month of March 1940. Their transport consisted of horses brought over from a farm in the Argentine, and there they were without camping equipment or even plans, although they were well aware that the district was almost entirely devoid of hotel accommodation and unknown to the fishing fraternity in Chile. For 2 weeks, they rode from one place to another in search of good fishing and good company, and got both. This is what Anthony Stobart says about the reception they got from the people they met. I must say that we neither of us have met such charming people in such an out-of-the-way place. Have ever met such charming people in such an out-of-the-way place. Everybody was pleased to see us, and we could have stayed anywhere we liked. They were enchanted with the upper reaches of the Biobío, and the following excerpts describe briefly the fishing conditions on one section of the river. Above this spot is some lovely water for about 20 kilometers. The valley is open like at Lonquimay with few trees, and the river is easily get-atable from both banks. The river is pretty well fished by local fishermen, who are all keen, but none of them had ever seen people fishing with a fly, and I should doubt if that stretch of water had ever had a fly cast on it before. On the Biobío, we took only one brown trout. All the rest were rainbow. I can imagine no nicer place to spend a few quiet days fishing. As this portion of the Biobío is situated in between two ranges of mountains, I feel quite convinced that it experiences better weather than the country to the east and west of it. Any approaching storm breaks its force on the surrounding mountains before reaching this little bit of valley, which is a point well worth remembering. There is no fear of the river being overfished. As you have gathered, there are no such things as hotels, and one must either bring a tent or stay with friends, which you quickly make. The real discovery of that trip was that splendid stretch of water in the upper reaches of the Biobío. One day's fishing is given as follows. I got 8 fish, the biggest about 3.5 pounds, mostly on a silver Wilkinson. David, meanwhile, had landed 7, one of which weighed 8 pounds, and 2 more of about 5.5 pounds each. He was fishing mostly with a Zulu, but caught his biggest with a dusty miller. I am sure that my readers will be interested in the story of this trip. It is a novel experience for an angler to find water where a fly has never been cast before, and there is no doubt that there are other stretches of water in Chile where the same would apply. Such trips as this to remote rivers off the beaten track require to be undertaken in a spirit of adventure and are well worthwhile. The rivers Duqueso, Renaico, Mininco, Maleco, Blanco, Quino, and Quien all contain trout but are little known. Dr. James Hector McLean spent his summer holidays regularly in the neighborhood of the rivers Renaico and Maleco and speaks well of the fishing there. Other reports also indicate that a quiet fishing holiday can be profitably spent in this district. The upper reaches of the Cotin might be treated as in this zone, but I am including the Cotin as a southern river. Southern zone. And now we come to the southern zone, extending from Lautaro to the far south, which contains all the world-famous fishing about which you have assuredly heard. In view of the lack of accommodation and touring facilities south of Puerto Montt, except in Magallanes, I have cut short the fishing map of the southern zone at Puerto Montt. I've added a footnote here. Puerto Montt city was founded in 1853 after government-sponsored immigration from Germany that began in 1848 populated the region. It was named after Manuel Montt, president of Chile between 1851 and 1861, who set in motion the German immigration. So I've cut short the fishing map of the southern zone at Puerto Montt. Nevertheless, the fishing in the extreme south is beginning to command attention, and I am making it the subject of a separate chapter towards the end of the book. A glance at the map will show you that this section of Chile, from Lautaro to Puerto Montt, is a veritable lake district, and the country is very lovely. From the fishing standpoint, the lakes can be disregarded as they are much too deep. It is known that there are very big fish in the lakes, but attempts to catch them in the ordinary way have proved unavailing, and in the shallower water near the shores, the fish seem to run small. One exception is the western end of Lake Villarrica, where good fishing may be had in the lake where it is not deep. Another exception is the western end of Lake Todos los Santos. All Saints, I suppose, in English. I shall be dealing in later chapters with several of the better-known fishing resorts in this district, Pucón, Villarrica, Pangui Pulli, Estación Los Lagos, and Lifen, which might be termed the Big Five, so that a passing reference to those places is all that need be made in this survey. Proceeding still from north to south, the first river we meet in this zone is the Cotin, which flows through Temuco. In the early days, the river Cotin was much patronized by fishermen, but presumably because of its proximity to the town of Temuco, the fishing steadily deteriorated, and fishermen found it necessary to go further afield. Some years ago, the authorities decided that action had to be taken to prevent further deterioration and closed the river for 2 years. It is gratifying to report that whatever the reason, the Cotin has come into its own again, and today it is one of the best rivers in Chile without the slightest doubt. From the point of view of the scenery, it is not attractive, but this is compensated by the excellence of the fishing. There is an abundance of bank fishing, both up and down river from Temuco, and plenty of good-sized trout. 2 years ago, I had the good fortune to spend a day on the Cotin between Temuco and Labranza and had excellent sport, the catch consisting of a dozen rainbow trout averaging 3 pounds. The recovery of the river coincided happily with the opening of a first-class hotel in Temuco, the Hotel de la Frontera, and in conjunction with the local fishing club, which provides boats and boatmen, the hotel management attends efficiently to all the requirements of fishermen. I can highly recommend the Cotin, and indeed wonder if I have given it sufficient prominence in this account of fishing in Chile. East and south of Temuco, there is a tributary of the river Cotin, the river Kepe, which also provides good sport. In the year 1943, the British ambassador to Chile, Sir Charles Ord, who was actually ambassador from 1940 to 1945, while staying at Wilfrid Cooper's farm in the vicinity, fished this stream one evening and caught 15 trout, averaging about 3/4 pound. The next fishing district is Lake Villarrica, with the river Trancura flowing into the eastern end of the lake at Pucón, and the river Tolten flowing out of the western end at Villarrica. This is undoubtedly the most famous fishing center in the country. Northeast of Pucón lies Lake Caburga, at the eastern end of which is the river Blanco, which is reported to hold huge fish. The river is very low in the summer, but towards the end of March or in April, when the fish commence to run, good sport might be had there. Close to the Argentine frontier, there is the river Maichin, a grand possibility for the future. One day, Pete Oburgen took me there in a jeep, and to reach the river, we had to take an ox cart road on which no motor car had ever been before. We parked the jeep at a likely spot on the river, and within 5 minutes, we were surrounded by a lot of Indians who rushed out to see this noisy thing which had invaded their tranquil life. Few of them, and certainly not the youngsters, had ever seen a car. We only fished for a little while, but came away with the conviction that more would be heard of the river Maichin. 32 kilometers, 20 miles south of Lake Villarrica, the road takes you to Lake Calafquén, which connects up with Lake Panguipulli through the river Guanehue. The hotel accommodation at this center is very limited and somewhat primitive, but recent reports of the fishing in the river Guanehue are most encouraging. Lake Panguipulli, which lake is of glacial origin and enclosed by the Andes Mountains on all sides except the west, where the town of Panguipulli lies. Lake Panguipulli is the center of a group of lakes, and in all directions there is splendid fishing, the best of which is to be found in the rivers Guanehue, Fui, and Enco. Further east, near the Argentine border, there is the Pirihueco district, with great possibilities, including a first-class new hotel connected with the Hotel Crilon in Santiago and a landing field. The latter is important as the trip from Santiago by land is long and tiring. Out of the western end of Lake Rinihue, I think it is, Rinihue, runs the river San Pedro with its fishing center in Estación Los Lagos on the main railway line. The next fishing resort towards the south is Clifén on the eastern end of Lake Ranco, with the choice of 4 rivers, the most accessible and best known of which is the Calcurupe. The river Bueno rises in the western end of Lake Ranco and flows all the way to the sea. It is a big river, and in addition to rainbow and brown trout, contains also steelhead. I am told that there is a small hotel nowadays at the western end of the lake, and the fishing in the river Bueno near the hotel is good. The river Pilmaiquen, which rises in Lake Puyehue, and the river Rahue, which rises in Lake Rupanco, Both tributaries of the River Bueno are splendid fishing rivers, but presumably owing to the competition of the more famous resorts further north, they, like the River Bueno, have never been much frequented by fishermen from abroad or even from the north of Chile. It was to the River Rahue that Henry John Brewster, who was a mason and a venerable master of Britannia Lodge in Santiago in 1936. I received this information by email from Ricardo Cuyumjan. Henry John Brewster took his wife for her first fishing expedition, and the very first fish she caught weighed 14.5 pounds. He had been fishing all his life and had never reached double figures. His prowess with rod and line suffered a severe setback temporarily, as his wife just refused to believe it was beginner's luck. However, with the passing of time, she has come to realize that in practice, that sort of thing happens once in a lifetime. The Puyehue district is an interesting subject as regards fishing, and I am devoting a separate chapter to it later. At the eastern end of Lake Puyehue, there is the river Golgol, with great possibilities, and several smaller rivers, Chanlelfu, Pescadero, and Nilke, running into the lake. 16 kilometers, 10 miles, south of Lake Puyehue, we come to Lake Rupanco, which is now coming into the picture as a fishing resort. Some years ago, John Curfey caught a 12.5-pound rainbow on a fly at the inlet of the river Gaviotas, which runs into the lake, and reports regarding the last season are equally encouraging. I am informed that the hotel, Termas de Rupanco, is good, and that when the fishing facilities are developed, excellent sport will be had in that district. Further south still, in the vicinity of Puerto Varas, where there is a splendid railway hotel, there is the river Molin, which rises in Lake Jlanquihue and near Ensenada at the eastern end of the lake, in the very heart of the finest scenery in the Chilean Lake District. There is the river Petrohue, which flows out of Lake Todos los Santos, and in a short precipitous course of about 50 kilometers, 31 miles, finds its way to the sea. The river Petrohue is unquestionably one of the finest trout rivers in the country, especially for the fly fishermen in the months of March and April. The fishing in the river is all from the bank, entailing hard work scrambling over rocks, and is no place for the fisherman who likes to take it easy. Rainbow trout in the Petrohue are magnificent and put up a great fight with the aid of the strong current. When I fished this river, conditions were bad as the river was warm after a long spell of drought, but I saw enough of it to convince me of its outstanding qualities. For the fishing visitor, there is unfortunately one great snag: hotel accommodation, as the hotel at Ensenada does not cater for fishermen, and there is virtually no accommodation in the small hotel at Petrohue. Another important point also is that one must make arrangements to have one's own transport in order to get at the fishing. If you can arrange for accommodation and transport, you will not regret a visit to the river Petrohue, and you can ask for nothing finer than a 3-pound rainbow in that river. Pancho Jones from Peru has spent several seasons there and has had wonderful sport with several rainbows over 10 pounds. Seems that he mentioned most of his friends in the book, or many of them. In the neighborhood of Puerto Montt, the terminus of the main railway line, there is the river Coihuin or Chamisa, which rises in Lake Chapo, and finally between Puerto Montt and Puerto Aysén, there are several rivers, notably the Yelcho, Palena, and the Aysén, with its tributaries, the rivers Simpson and Manihuales, all of which have been stocked with trout and have great possibilities. They are not shown on my fishing map of the southern zone for the reasons previously stated. The trouble is that in the south of Puerto Montt, except in Magallanes, you come up against the question of accommodation, as the country is quite undeveloped. But between La Unión and Puerto Montt, there are several rivers which I have mentioned, as for instance, the Bueno, Rahue, Molin, and Chamisa, which are not included in my Big Five, but provide grand fishing. It may be their proximity to the bigger towns in the south that keeps fishermen from other parts away. they naturally preferring the more picturesque rivers among the lakes near the Cordillera, the Andes mountain range. Or it may be just that they are not as well known as the more famous rivers further north. Whatever it is, I cannot say, but it seems to me that those rivers and the rivers between Puerto Montt and Puerto Aysén may well be the future salmon rivers of Chile, as they appear to have all the necessary characteristics. I wonder if that's the case. Was his prediction correct? Perhaps somebody could tell me that in the comments, maybe. So that's the end of chapter 9, and I will stop here. Thank you very much for listening.